James Ice Malone and Reese Blaze Thompson were two names that struck fear into the heart of Liverpool. Leaders of rival gangs, whose bitter feud would ignite a violent turf war that tore Merseyside apart. What started as a fight over control of the streets quickly spiraled into a deadly battle, leaving a trail of blood, betrayal and broken communities in its wake. This is the story of how two men's ambitions sparked Liverpool's deadliest gang war, and a city that would never be the same again. Merseyside, known for its bustling docks, football passion, and rich cultural history, seemed like any other vibrant city in England. But beneath the surface, a quieter, darker world was slowly taking shape. In the shadows of Liverpool streets, two gangs were growing in influence, each rooted deeply in their communities but driven by ambition and survival. The Deli Mob earned their name from humble beginnings, a group that first came together around a small, family-run deli shop on the outskirts of the city. Over time, they evolved from petty thieves and small-time dealers into a tightly knit crew controlling parts of Liverpool's underground economy. Their leader was a man of few words, respected for his sharp mind and fierce loyalty to those who earned it. On the other side, the Nasho Crew emerged from the heart of the Nasho estate, a working-class neighborhood known for its close community, but also its struggles with poverty and limited opportunities. The crew formed as a way for young men in the area to protect their own and carve out a better life, though their path quickly twisted into crime and violence. The Nasho Crew was larger and louder, known for their bold moves and street presence. They operated with an almost territorial pride, determined to hold on to the estate and expand their reach. For years, both groups managed to keep a fragile peace. The city's underworld had unspoken rules, and despite occasional disputes, the Deli Mob and Nasho Crew mostly stuck to their own corners of Merseyside. There was a sense of mutual respect mixed with wariness, as neither wanted to provoke a full-scale conflict. But beneath this calm, tensions simmered quietly. Every stolen deal, every disrespectful glance, every rumored betrayal fed the fire of resentment. People on the streets noticed a change, a shift in the atmosphere that suggested something was about to break. No one could have predicted how quickly the situation would spiral. What seemed like small conflicts in the beginning were actually the first moves in a deadly game that would soon grip the entire city. Liverpool was on the brink of a war, unlike any it had seen before, one that would tear apart communities and leave scars for years to come. The calm before the storm was ending, and Merseyside was about to be shaken to its core. The fragile peace between the Deli Mob and the Nasho Crew shattered in the darkest corner of Liverpool's dockyards, where shipping containers stood like silent giants guarding secrets. It started with a single drug shipment, meant for the Nasho Crew, that never reached its destination. Instead, the Deli Mob intercepted it in a daring and carefully planned move. This wasn't just about money, it was a message. The theft was seen as a direct challenge to the Nasho Crew's power and pride. From that moment, the simmering tension ignited into open hostility. Retaliation came quickly. The Nasho Crew struck back by disrupting the Deli Mob's supply chains, hitting their sources and making it harder for them to operate. What had been small disputes now became violent confrontation. Spray-painted threats appeared on walls, windows were smashed, and cars were torched. Both gangs started using more aggressive tactics, no longer just taking what they wanted but seeking to punish and intimidate. It was a dangerous escalation, and the city's streets began to feel less safe with each passing day. The violence wasn't random. It was carefully targeted, designed to weaken the other side's grip on their territory. Members were attacked at night, ambushed on the edges of their neighborhoods. Innocent bystanders were sometimes caught in the crossfire, their homes and lives shattered by stray bullets or vandalism. What started as a fight for control over drug routes and street corners turned into a brutal war where no one was truly safe. As the gang war deepened, both groups hardened their ranks. Alliances were forged with smaller gangs and individuals hungry for power. The Deli Mob and Nasho Crew became not just rival gangs but symbols of survival and dominance in Merseyside's underground world. Fear spread throughout the city. People started locking their doors earlier and avoided certain areas after dark. The once vibrant nightlife grew quieter, shadows lengthening as the threat of violence loomed large. Liverpool's residents began to realize this wasn't a brief conflict. It was a full-scale turf war, one that would change the city forever. The docks, the streets, and the neighborhoods were no longer safe havens. They were battlefields in a war that only seemed to grow more vicious with every passing day. At the center of the escalating violence were two leaders whose personalities shaped the course of the gang war in ways no one could have predicted. The Deli Mob's leader was a man known for his icy calm and sharp intelligence. A former boxer who had once dreamed of making it big in the ring, he had turned to crime after injuries ended his sports career. His experience in the ring gave him a reputation for discipline and strategy, and he ran the Deli Mob like a well-oiled machine. Every move was calculated, every decision carefully weighed. His leadership was cold but effective, and his crew followed him without question, trusting his judgment to protect them and expand their influence. In stark contrast, the Nasho Crew's leader was charismatic and unpredictable, with a fierce loyalty to his people but a temper that often clouded his decisions. Growing up in the tough streets of Nasho Estate, he had risen through the ranks by sheer force of will and raw courage. His style was more impulsive and aggressive, leading his crew with passion and a readiness to strike quickly. His supporters admired him for his fearlessness and dedication, but his enemies saw him as volatile and dangerous. This difference in leadership styles meant the war wasn't just a battle over territory, but a clash of personalities, one precise and calculated, the other fiery and impulsive. Both leaders had personal reasons for fighting beyond the gang war itself. The Deli Mob's boss sought control, not just for power, but to prove himself after years of setbacks. His ambition was driven by a need to rise above the past, to rewrite his story. The Nasho Crew's leader, meanwhile, fought to protect his community and avenge years of neglect and hardship. For him, the gang was family, and every attack on their turf was personal. These leaders didn't just direct violence, they inspired it. Their crews were fiercely loyal, willing to risk everything because they believed in their leader's vision. As the feud deepened, their contrasting styles fueled the conflict, turning it into a deadly game of strategy, passion, and revenge. The city watched, powerless, as these two men's ambitions clashed with devastating consequences. The first murder was a turning point that sent shockwaves through Merseyside, shattering the uneasy calm that had held for so long. A prominent member of the Deli Mob was found dead in a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The killing was not just brutal, it was designed to send a clear message to anyone who might consider crossing the gang. The victim's body showed signs of a violent struggle, and the scene was left in a way that no one could mistake the meaning behind it. This was no random act of violence, it was a calculated statement of power and warning. The discovery of the body rocked both gangs and the wider community. For the Deli Mob, it was a devastating loss, fueling anger and a thirst for revenge. For the Nasho Crew, it was a bold move, meant to show they were willing to escalate the conflict to deadly levels. This murder marked a new, dangerous phase of the war, one where bloodshed would become the norm rather than the exception. In the days that followed, the violence escalated rapidly. Retaliation attacks were swift and brutal. Properties were burned, vehicles torched, and members targeted in hit-and-run attacks. What had been mostly about territory and money turned personal. The cycle of revenge spiraled out of control, dragging more people into the conflict. Families who once tried to stay clear of the gangs found themselves caught in the crossfire, forced to face the harsh reality of the war unfolding in their neighborhoods. The city's streets grew more dangerous, and fear took hold. Residents who had once gone about their daily lives without worry now moved cautiously, aware that danger lurked just around the corner. The violence affected every part of Liverpool. Schools, markets, and even places of worship were touched by the ripple effects of the gang war. The police presence increased, but for many, it felt like too little, too late. The murder changed everything. It was the moment when the feud turned from a turf war into a deadly battle for survival. The cost of loyalty, pride and revenge became tragically clear. The feud was no longer just about gangs. It was about a city fighting to hold itself together amid rising chaos. As the violence escalated, the Merseyside police found themselves overwhelmed and struggling to regain control. Both the Deli Mob and Nasho Crew operated with extreme caution, using secret meeting spots, coded messages, and trusted couriers to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. The gangs had deep roots in their communities, making it difficult for officers to gather reliable information. Witnesses were too afraid to speak, fearing brutal retaliation if they cooperated. This silence created a wall that police found almost impossible to break through. Undercover operations were launched in a desperate attempt to infiltrate the gangs, but these efforts often ended in frustration. Informants were discovered and eliminated, forcing the police to start over repeatedly. The complexity of the gangs' networks meant that even when arrests were made, key players slipped away or new members quickly filled the gaps. It became clear that traditional policing methods were not enough to contain the chaos. As frustration mounted within the force, the public's patience began to wear thin. Liverpool's streets were no longer safe, and the fear spread like wildfire. Local businesses suffered as customers stayed away from areas affected by the gang war. Community leaders called for action, demanding stronger measures to protect residents. The media spotlight intensified, shining a harsh light on the city's darkest corners and exposing the scale of the problem to the whole country. In response, the police increased patrols and launched a series of raids targeting known gang hotspots. These operations disrupted some of the gang's activities, but the effect was often temporary. The gangs adapted quickly, moving their operations underground or shifting to new locations. The cycle of violence continued, seemingly unstoppable. Meanwhile, the war's impact reached beyond the streets. Families were torn apart by loss and fear, and schools struggled to keep students safe amid the unrest. The social fabric of entire neighborhoods began to unravel. The police were caught in a difficult position, battling a powerful enemy that was as much a part of the community as it was a criminal threat. Despite the mounting pressure, the gangs showed no sign of backing down. The battle for control raged on, and the city held its breath, waiting to see how far the violence would go and whether peace could ever return. As the gang war dragged on, the toll on both sides became impossible to ignore. Members of the Nasho Crew, once proud and fierce, grew tired of the constant bloodshed and endless cycle of revenge. The violence was not only destroying their enemies but also tearing apart their own families and neighborhoods. Quietly, a faction within the Nasho Crew began to question the wisdom of continuing the feud. They saw how the war was bringing nothing but grief and danger to everyone involved and started seeking a way out. Secret meetings began to take place, away from prying eyes and ears. Representatives from this more moderate faction reached out to trusted figures within the Deli Mob who shared their desire for peace. The talks were cautious and tense. Years of hatred and violence couldn't be wiped away overnight, but the possibility of a truce sparked hope for a better future. Both sides knew that continuing the war would only lead to more deaths and destruction. However, the fragile peace was threatened almost immediately. Extremists in both gangs saw any attempt at a ceasefire as a betrayal of their cause. For them, backing down meant weakness, and they feared losing control over their territories and influence. These hardliners worked in secret to sabotage the talks, spreading rumors, staging attacks, and stirring up anger among their crews. The tension between the moderates and extremists created an even more dangerous environment, as loyalties were tested and trust became scarce. Despite the obstacles, the moderate leaders tried to hold on to their vision. They believed that the city deserved a chance to heal, and that the youth growing up in Liverpool should not inherit the violence that had defined their streets. Grassroots community members, local activists, and religious leaders supported the peace efforts, organizing gatherings and encouraging dialogue between divided neighborhoods. Though fragile and often overshadowed by ongoing violence, these efforts planted the seeds of hope. The possibility of ending the war showed that even part of the moderate faction pushing for an end to the violence secretly began feeding information to the Nasho Crew. This act of treachery was kept hidden for weeks, allowing the Nasho Crew to plan a devastating ambush that caught the Deli Mob completely off guard. The ambush was swift and brutal. It happened at a location the Deli Mob had believed to be safe, a secluded meeting spot where leaders had gathered to discuss the ceasefire. The attack left several key members of the Deli Mob seriously injured or dead. The betrayal sent shockwaves through the gang, destroying any remaining trust between the factions and eroding hope for peace. The Deli Mob's sense of security was shattered, replaced by paranoia and suspicion. No one knew who might be the next traitor. This betrayal didn't just end the peace talks. It ignited a new level of violence and chaos. Both gangs became more ruthless, striking without hesitation, and targeting anyone they suspected of disloyalty. The war became a brutal hunt for revenge, with innocent people caught in the crossfire as loyalties were questioned and alliances shifted. The betrayal fractured the delicate balance that had briefly held the city together. Paranoia spread quickly through both gangs. Friendships and partnerships were tested as suspicion grew. Members questioned their own crews, fearing spies and informants everywhere. This fear led to a wave of internal violence, punishments, disappearances, and violent confrontations within the gangs themselves. The line between enemy and ally blurred, as trust was replaced by fear. The city of Liverpool, already battered by years of conflict, now faced an even darker chapter. The betrayal had turned a dangerous gang war into a full-blown crisis that threatened to consume everyone involved. The violence became more unpredictable, more savage, and the scars left on the community deeper than ever before. It was a devastating reminder of how fragile peace can be, and how quickly it can be destroyed by one act of treachery. As the gang war raged on, its violence spilled beyond the gangs themselves, tearing through families and neighborhoods across Liverpool. What began as conflicts between the Deli Mob and Nasho Crew soon reached into everyday life, making once safe streets and public places sites of fear and danger. Innocent people found themselves caught in the crossfire, walking home from work, picking up children from school, or simply going about their daily routines. Attacks near schools and community centers shocked the city, showing how deeply the feud had infected every corner of life. These incidents sparked outrage among residents, many of whom had no ties to the gangs, but were living with the consequences of their battles. Parents worried about their children's safety, businesses shuttered early or closed altogether, and community gatherings became tense and cautious affairs. The very fabric of neighborhoods was beginning to unravel as fear and mistrust grew. Families who had lived side by side for generations now eyed each other with suspicion, worried that anyone might be connected to one gang or the other. Local leaders stepped up, organizing rallies and vigils to call for peace. They urged the gangs to end the bloodshed, reminding everyone that the violence was destroying the city's future. Schools held special assemblies, and religious groups offered support to those affected. The media quickly labeled the conflict Liverpool's deadliest gang war, bringing national attention to the crisis and putting additional pressure on authorities to act. But while the calls for peace grew louder, the fighting showed no signs of slowing. The increased violence pushed the police to their limits. Patrols intensified, and officers worked around the clock to protect community and respond to emergencies. Still, the gangs adapted quickly, finding new ways to evade law enforcement and continue their fight. The city felt trapped in a cycle of violence that seemed impossible to break. For many in Liverpool, life became a daily struggle to survive amid the chaos. The gang war was no longer just a battle for turf. It was a war that threatened the heart of the city itself. The community's hope for peace clung on, but with each passing day, that hope grew more fragile, as the war continued to tear lives apart. A turning point came when the police, after months of careful planning and surveillance, launched a bold raid that shook the foundations of both gangs. Acting on intelligence gathered through undercover work and community tips, Officers stormed a secret meeting where top leaders from the Deli Mob and Nasho Crew were believed to be negotiating. The arrests were swift and decisive, capturing several key figures whose leadership had driven much of the violence. For the first time, the gangs felt vulnerable, their power suddenly weakened. These arrests sent shockwaves through the criminal networks. Without their experienced leaders to guide them, both gangs struggled to maintain control. Internal rivalries and power struggles erupted as ambitious members fought to fill the vacuum. The carefully organized operations that had once fueled the turf war began to crumble. In some areas, violence temporarily decreased as the gangs regrouped, confused and uncertain about their next moves. Behind bars, some of the captured leaders began to reflect on the destruction their feud had caused. The months in custody allowed time for reconsideration, and a few reached out through their contacts to explore the possibility of ending the violence. While these attempts were cautious and limited, they signaled a shift in attitude, acknowledging the heavy cost the war had taken on their communities and even themselves. Outside prison walls, grassroots efforts to rebuild and heal gained momentum. Local activists, religious leaders and community members worked tirelessly to bridge the divides the gang war had deepened. They organized neighborhood meetings, youth programs and peace-building workshops, aimed at giving young people alternatives to gang life. Slowly, cracks appeared in the cycle of violence, as more residents refused to be silent or complicit. Despite these positive steps, the scars left by years of conflict ran deep. Trust between neighborhoods remained fragile, and the trauma of loss weighed heavily on families and communities. The gangs had not disappeared entirely, and sporadic violence continued, but the arrests marked a crucial turning point, a moment when Liverpool began to imagine a future beyond the deadly feud. The city started to breathe again, cautiously hopeful that with continued effort, peace might one day take root in place of violence. Years after the feud that shook Merseyside, the echoes of the gang war still lingered across Liverpool, a dark shadow over the city's streets and communities. Many of those involved in the violence remained behind bars, serving long sentences for crimes committed during the brutal conflict. Others had vanished, some fleeing the city, while a few had paid the ultimate price. The war had left a trail of broken families, shattered neighborhoods, and lives forever changed. But it had also sparked a transformation, one that reshaped how the city dealt with crime and community safety. The legacy of the feud became a powerful lesson for Liverpool. New laws were introduced, focusing on disrupting gang activities and providing stronger support for victims. Police forces adopted more sophisticated tactics, emphasizing intelligence gathering and community engagement. These changes, born from hard experience, helped prevent the rise of similar violent conflicts in the future. The story of the Deli Mob and Nasho Crew became a cautionary tale told in schools and community centers, a reminder of what could happen when violence and pride spiral out of control. Communities began to rebuild, slowly but steadily. Grassroots organizations played a crucial role, working to heal the divisions caused by years of hostility. Programs aimed at youth offered alternatives to gang life, focusing on education, sports, and employment opportunities. Neighborhoods once known for fear and violence found new pride in their resilience and hope for the future. While scars remained, a stronger sense of unity emerged. Former gang members who had turned their lives around shared their stories, warning younger generations of the dangers of violence and the value of peace. The city's spirit, long tested, proved to be unbreakable. Liverpool's deadliest gang war was a chapter that shook the city to its core. But it was not the end of the story. It was a painful but necessary awakening, one that led to change, healing, and the determination to build a safer, brighter future. The feud had left a mark, but it also ignited a commitment to never let such darkness consume Merseyside again.